The man you're looking at is no ordinary person. He lived for more than 30 years in the heart of Cairo, in a neighborhood where he was known as Derek, or Uncle Derek. People believed he was originally German and had chosen to spend the rest of his life in Cairo. He would pray in the front row of the mosque and teach the neighborhood children the noble Quran. He also loved giving them small gifts whenever he could. But after 30 years, the people of Egypt discover that the calmness and the constant smile on his face were hiding a massive and shocking secret. This man was not an ordinary foreigner. He was someone trying to escape a dark history he had been deeply involved in for many years. A history marked with blood and war, one that earned him the nickname, the Doctor of Death. So who was this man? And what was the dark past he was hiding? This is CoreView Media. Welcome to today's topic. The date, June 28, 1914, is marked as the day the First World War began. On that day, a single bullet that struck the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne ignited a global war that would claim millions of lives. On that same day, in a small town in Austria, a child named Aribert Heim was born. Aribert opened his eyes to a world in flames and to a homeland collapsing under the weight of war. His father, a police officer, witnessed with his own eyes how the law and order of their country were falling apart, as Austria became a nation crippled by poverty, and its people were filled with anger over the humiliating defeat they had suffered in the war. These people felt oppressed and degraded, and a deep desire for revenge began to grow within them, one that crossed all limits. This was the period in which Hitler's ideology was emerging. Ideas centered around the supremacy of the so-called Aryan race and the belief that the world needed to be cleansed of other peoples. Hitler portrayed himself as the only leader capable of restoring the lost honor of the Aryan nation. This was the atmosphere in which the man we are discussing today, Aribert, grew up. He witnessed the spread of these ideas with his own eyes and heard with his own ears how his people had been wronged. All of this shaped his way of thinking. When Aribert Heim became a young man, he turned into a talented athlete who played the ice sport known as hockey. His name regularly appeared in newspapers, and he possessed a future that any young person of that time would have dreamed of. But within him was a different ambition. He decided to leave the ice rinks and enter the cold rooms of the morgue at the medical university in Vienna, where he met his professor, Edward Pernkopf, whom he regarded as a national hero. The professor was a member of Hitler's Nazi military, and he was an expert in the science known as anatomy, the practice of dissecting a person's body after death to examine the organs and determine the cause of death. In 1940, the gifted young athlete had transformed into a doctor serving in Hitler's army. In 1941, Aribert Heim arrived at the prison known as Mauthausen. This was no ordinary prison.
It was one of the most brutal places a human being could enter. As soon as you stepped inside, you were overwhelmed by the suffocating stench that filled the camp and the screams of people being tortured. The camp was built near a quarry where granite stones were mined, and prisoners were forced to climb long stairways, carrying those heavy stones on their backs. When Aribert arrived, he was only 27 years old. At that time, the senior Nazi officers had issued an order declaring that the camp was overcrowded and needed to be cleansed to make room for new prisoners. The word cleansing meant something very different to Aribert. It meant he had full permission to kill whoever he wished. Within just 6 weeks, his name became engraved in the memories of every prisoner who survived the camp. He was no ordinary doctor. He was a merciless man who took pleasure in the pain and screams of his victims. The young doctor, Aribert Heim, became known as the Doctor of Death. The medical room of the Mauthausen camp, which was supposed to be a place where prisoners were treated when sick, was turned by him into an execution ground where he carried out agonizing experiments that always ended in death. What he did was described as scientific research, presented as though he were conducting legitimate medical studies.
Aribert carefully selected his victims. He did not choose the sick or the elderly. Instead, he specifically selected young, healthy prisoners. They would be tied down in the room, and Aribert would stand before them with a smile on his face, injecting their hearts with a syringe filled with gasoline, poison, or anything else that came to his mind. After injecting them, he would calmly check his watch and pull out a small notebook from his pocket to record the results of the experiment. He would write things such as, "The substance used this time is gasoline. Time of death, 1 minute and 7 seconds. Symptoms, violent shaking and intense screams." He would watch dying people writhing in pain as if he was watching an ordinary film. And he did not stop there. He had another obsession, discovering how much pain a human being could endure. To find an answer, he performed surgeries on prisoners to remove organs such as kidneys, livers, eyes, and others while they were fully conscious and not anesthetized. When he finished, he would leave them there to bleed to death. Within 6 weeks, the camp's medical room had turned into a grave that claimed the lives of more than 300 people. His brutality was not driven by orders. It was a personal hobby he enjoyed. His notebook contained horrifying notes describing the horrors his victims endured. The most infamous story showing his madness was what he did to one of the prisoners, a young man with extremely white teeth. Aribert admired his teeth, so he ordered him to be sedated and killed. Hours after his death, Aribert cut off his head, placed it in a large pot, ordered it to be boiled until all the flesh came off, and finally placed the clean skull on his office desk as a decoration to show off to his colleagues. Another habit of his was choosing prisoners with tattoos. He would order them killed, skin their bodies, and turn their skin into chair covers used to decorate offices. When Hitler's Nazi regime collapsed in 1945 and World War II ended, roles changed. The hunters became the hunted, and war criminals scattered and hid. Aribert Heim was captured by American forces, and it seemed his story had come to an end, just like the other 61 officers from Mauthausen who were executed. But he had a different plan. The doctor had long prepared for this day. The moment he sensed defeat, he burned and destroyed every document that could prove his crimes. When interrogated by American investigators, they found nothing showing the horrors he committed. Instead, they found a calm, confident doctor who spoke excellent English.
He claimed to be a junior doctor with no experience who only followed orders to protect himself and his family. He convinced the investigators he knew nothing of the crimes and that the accusations were falsehoods invented by angry prisoners. The chaotic, unstable state of Europe at the time made it easy to believe him, and he was released and walked out of the camp. When the war ended and Europe was rebuilt, Aribert Heim decided not to hide, but to return to his homeland. He settled in the German city of Baden-Baden, opened a clinic specializing in women's health and childbirth, married into a wealthy family, and lived in one of the most luxurious villas in the city. For 20 years, he lived a peaceful, stable life, until everything suddenly changed.
In 1962, Aribert Heim's case was reopened. Germany's Criminal Investigation Department started tracking anyone suspected of being involved in Hitler's massacres, and his name was on the wanted list. One day, while he was sitting at home, he received a phone call that changed everything. It was a warning from his wife. "Run now, the police are coming for you." In a single second, the life and reputation he built for 20 years collapsed. One autumn night in 1962, Aribert Heim escaped, leaving everything behind. He began one of the biggest escapes ever recorded in the history of war crimes. From that moment on, he became the third most wanted Nazi criminal, leading a list of 300 suspects. His escape plan was very well prepared, designed to confuse anyone following his trail. He left Germany, went to France, then Spain, and from there crossed by sea to Morocco, then traveled from Morocco to Libya. While most Nazis escaped to South America, Aribert chose a completely different path, one that led to the crowded city of Cairo. After his long escape, he reached Cairo in 1963 using a fake passport, pretending to be a businessman. He blended into the huge, busy population. He lived in the neighborhoods of Al-Moski and Bab el-Khalq, moving between them, confident that Cairo's noise would hide him. His first step was to find a place where he could disappear. He found a small hotel called Qasr al-Medina, and from the first day, he began building a new identity. He appeared as a tall, strong foreigner who looked like an athlete. He started learning how important religion was to the people around him and realized it was the key to blending into society. He read books about Islam. One day, someone in the hotel gave him a translated Quran. Soon after, he went to the mosque and publicly announced that he had become Muslim. He registered a new birth certificate with a new name, Tariq Hussein Farid, a fully Egyptian identity that hid his past. As Uncle Tariq, he lived a double life. In Cairo, he was seen as a kind, newly converted Muslim who lived a simple life and was loved by his neighbors. But thousands of kilometers away, he was a wanted mass murderer whose face appeared on TV with a reward on his head. His only connection to his old life was his son Rudiger, who occasionally visited and brought money from a building he owned in Berlin. Rudiger was the only one who knew his dad was Aribert Heim. In 1990, Aribert Heim learned he had cancer. He became old and weak. His neighbors in Cairo loved him and cared for him like family. In his final days, especially in 1992, he asked his son Rudiger to visit.
Rudiger arrived and found his father in a wheelchair, being cared for lovingly by an Egyptian family. Aribert wrote his final will. He asked for his body to be donated to medical schools, but this request was rejected because Egyptians did not allow such things at that time. He also asked to be buried in a cemetery for the poor. On the night of August 10, 1992, Aribert Heim died. His neighbors washed his body, prayed over him, and buried him in an unmarked grave. And so the secret he carried came to an end. But the story did not finish there. Uncle Tarek had left behind a small wooden box and an old leather bag. The hotel owners, the Duma family, stored them without knowing that these items carried a secret that the world had been searching for 30 years. Years after his death, a joint investigation by German TV and the New York Times reached the hotel and interviewed the owner. He told them about the box and bag. When they opened them, they found everything the world was looking for. His dark history, his Egyptian passport with his new name, his old German passport, money records, family letters, notes he had written, and most importantly, official Nazi documents and photos of him wearing Hitler's military uniform. On February 4, 2009, 17 years after his death, the world woke up to shocking news. Uncle Tarek was actually Aribert Heim, the Doctor of Death. The people in Cairo who loved him refused to believe it and thought it was a conspiracy because he had become Muslim. But the strongest evidence came when his dentist, Dr. Tarek al-Rifai, provided one of Haim's teeth. DNA tests proved, without any doubt, that it matched the DNA of his family. Finally, his son admitted the truth, and one of the most unbelievable cases of identity hiding in history was exposed.